Welcome to Authors Alcove, the Reading Nook. I am your host, Agnes Wolfe. Today I have Pete McGinty. He has just written his first novel, but he also has a vast career in marketing, branding, and advertising, helping brands such as McDonald's, White Castle, Wendy's, Amway, which is near me, and more. He is also an auto racing freelance photographer who has shot dozens of IndyCar, NASCAR, and sports car races. In this chapter of his life, he is now venturing into the storytelling and writing world. I am excited to talk about this World War II historical fiction named Private Cummings. It's a beautifully written book, and actually a beautiful book. I'm actually going to ask him a little bit about his formatting and his cover, which I am actually kind of bummed that I did not receive it until yesterday because I really wanted to start reading it before. But we had a rainy day and a bunch of kids at my house yesterday. And then this morning, it's been kind of rough too. I've been trying to get this audio working and I have had so much trouble. I'm using a totally different system than I normally do. But anyway, welcome, Pete. How are you today?
I'm great. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Before we begin talking about your book, I just want to know what has gotten you into the writing world.
Well, I think probably like most authors who get into it late in life, like I have, it's always kind of been a dream. And I've dabbled, I would say, for many, many years. I remember the first time I really tried to write uh, a novel was in 1994 when I'd gotten sick. I had pneumonia and I was off work for like 4 weeks. And I thought, well, I'll just write a book. And so longhand on yellow legal pads with a thin Sharpie, I wrote front and back. I filled up four notebooks of a story, which was awful, of course, and I was really proud to tell all my friends and family, I'm writing a book. I'm going to be an author, right? Well, that went nowhere. And I've always, just kind of maintained that dream, and I've written on and off over the decades, really. And I wrote a novel from front to back about 15 years ago. And I was so green at it. I thought, okay, now I finished one, and I didn't even reread it or edit it. I just gave it out to people. And I said, here, will you read my book and let me know what you think? And of course, my mom loved it, but I had a couple of friends who knew better, and they said, this is not good. And I was crushed, and I put it on a shelf, and I never looked at it again. And it's a good story in there somewhere. But I was like, this is, so I'll tell you what launched. Well, and then so I started studying the process of writing, and I wrote a nonfiction book about 4 years ago about we have a Major League Soccer team here in Columbus, Ohio, called the Columbus Crew. And the owner was threatening to move the team to Austin, Texas. And so there was this huge grassroots movement called the Save the Crew movement that really their efforts over a period of a year forced leadership and political leaders and so forth and business leaders to come together and find a way to buy find ownership and keep the team in Columbus, which they did. They won the MLS Cup that year. This was 2020. They won the MLS Cup last year in 2023. At any rate, I wrote that book is called Accidental Heroes, and it's nonfiction. So, and I say this because once I got connected to the Save the Crew team, there's like 19 individuals. I was committed to write it. Right, I was committed. I was interviewing from the mayor to local business leaders. Everybody knew I was writing the story of the Save the Crew movement, which was huge in Columbus. So it wasn't anybody that didn't know about that movement. But I say that because I wasn't dabbling anymore. I had to approach it professionally. So because people were counting on me, I knew I was going to publish it. I had a deal, all of these things. So, I learned I learned the hard process of writing that, editing and rereading and reworking, and, it took a year. It wasn't the kind of thing you just do it and send it out there and I'm done. So that was instrumental in committing to that and writing it. Then I don't know if you know Julia Cameron. She's an author, screenwriter. She wrote a book called The Artist's Way, and it's a self-guided program of creativity and finding your spiritual and creative self. And I did that program two years ago. It was a 16-week program, and it helps you set goals and so forth, and helps you tap into that inner creative self. And through that program, I made commitments and goals that I was going to write and publish a novel. And I gave myself a timeline. I wanted to publish it by the end of 2023. And I did it. And I also, a mentor of mine, he doesn't know he's a mentor, he's Stephen Pressfield. He wrote a book called The War of Art. And he talks about overcoming resistance. And he talks about the difference between being a dabbler and being a professional. And when you're a dabbler, you can just decide you're tired, you have a headache, you don't want to write. But if you're a professional, you have to write. It's like Kobe Bryant. He uses that example. Kobe Bryant is he doesn't wouldn't let a sprained ankle stop him from practicing or playing. The commitment as a professional. So I started that, and I just approached it that way. And so there were a lot of influences. And I also, studied the form of writing and the three-story structure. And, I learned about inciting incidents and progressive complications and crises and climax and resolutions and the transformation of a character. I read tons of books, number of books about the process of writing. Stephen King's on writing. I could name them, but at any rate.
You just mentioned that you did The Accidental Heroes. Can you just share what that one is exactly about? And then can you just kind of describe how that was different than writing a fiction book?
Accidental Heroes, right?
Yes.
That's Accidental Heroes, the grassroots movement that helped save the Columbus crew. It was more journalistic. It was a 1-year historical biography, if you will, about this movement, about the individuals that were involved. So I probably at least 80 or 90 interviews I conducted. So it was very journalistic, and factual, and I had to get my facts right. I wanted to tell the story. It's a very emotional story of the people that were involved and the people that sacrificed greatly and gave up. Sometimes some of them quit their jobs to focus entirely on this. And so it was a big deal in Columbus when the team was saved, literally saved from being moved to Austin, Texas. So the process of writing nonfiction and this historical journey, which is a nonfiction historical journey, versus fiction. Fiction, I enjoyed both, but fiction is the thing about when you write a fiction novel, it all comes from here. Yeah, and so what I started to love was, I controlled all the characters. I controlled the dialogue. I controlled the behaviors. I controlled the whole arc of the story, and knowing that it all came from my own imagination, and that I could get into the skin of these characters and understand them and portray them in the right way through their voice and so forth, is really kind of a blast. And to be able to develop an arc of a story from start to finish and have a produced book at the end of it was really cool. So I'm really focused now on I guess a second career at age 65 after I've retired from my marketing gig, to become a novelist, I guess, right? So, I may have an opportunity to write a nonfiction book again, but only if the right thing hits me or I'm at, but in the meantime, it's all whatever's stirring in my mind, and whatever story I can, I can project outward. So that's a lot of fun.
I know that I absolutely love reading anything with World War II, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, whatever. I know one of the books that have had the most profound effect on me, I actually listened it through an audio while I was busy, and I didn't really know what I was picking up. I just had saw that it was a recommended book. I didn't even read the back of it. It was called Boy in the Blue Striped Pajamas. And it was just phenomenal. And that was a World War II one. And so when I saw that this was World War II, and I was like, I don't have time to read it before I meet with him, but I will have it read before this goes live. And we are going to be giving this particular book out. But I want to know, what was your inspiration behind Private Cummings?
The inspiration was it was very simple. I had an idea of an older man who befriends and develops, who's a recluse for whatever reason. I didn't know the reason yet. Who befriends a young boy, and things happen between them that transform both of their lives. That's all I started with. And then I said, okay, I need to start now developing the character, the depth of the characters and who they are. And previous writings, the really bad book I told you about, and then another one focused on had a war genre too. It was Vietnam, and the soldiers, the protagonist was a Vietnam vet, that kind of thing. And in this, I don't know, I'm not sure what drew me to World War II as opposed to Vietnam. I think it was just the era that I wanted to write about. And so when I developed just the character of the protagonist and antagonists, but I made him a World War II hero who is terribly disfigured through a plane crash. And because of some events, they find out he has a relationship with another soldier, and he's given the Medal of Honor. Once it's discovered that he had this relationship, this is this is World War II, right? He's discharged, loses all of his benefits, and becomes that recluse. And then ends up moving from, this is based in Grayson, Kentucky, moves to Mansfield, Ohio, in with his sister, and as a recluse in her house. But he lives near this neighborhood of a bunch of young, like 12 and 13-year-old boy hooligan types, who one of which is, and my main character's name is Hank Cummings. But one of the kids, his name is Johnny. And so he and Johnny meet, and there's a profound impact on especially Johnny as a 13-year-old boy at the time. And then they reunite 30 years later in life. At the end of Hank's life, when Johnny now goes by Jonathan, is an adult. He's 43 years old now. And what happens at the reunion during the final days of Hank's life, I don't want to give it all away, changes the course of Jonathan's life. And so there's this the spiritual connection between the two, and this again, transformation that happens between each of them because of their relationship. And it's almost a chance meeting that they have early that brings them back together 30 years later. So I really try to kind of reach into the emotional depth of what Hank Cummings, my protagonist, what he has gone through in his life because of the things that have happened to him, and how he has survived and reclaimed his life in a way. And then how his story is then told through Jonathan later in life.
You know, that kind of brings me to the next question I had. I was very impressed by the reviews you have on here, and I'm just going to read them. Blue Ink review says, an engaging portrait of two lives filled with human longing and the costs of being different. And then Ishan Asian, reader's favorite, says, a deep story with focus on respect and acceptance in the face of bias that will leave an indelible impression on all readers. And then Midwest Book Review said, an evolving friendship between a boy and a man, a sense of tragedy that morphs into heroism and loves at the end. And I noticed the connection between all three is that it really focuses on the relationship. And so that obviously is a very powerful part of your story. What was your inspiration behind that particular relationship between the two men?
I think it came from really digging into the depth of the characters. One thing I really do enjoy about fiction writing is to really live as the character. I think when you write fiction, and I'm a rookie at this, but you know, when you're just punching it out, you're doing it as them. You know, whether it's first person point of view or third, whatever. I wrote this in first person point of view through two different characters, Hank and Jonathan. And I think I really tried to tap deep into their emotion. and the whole thing, show, don't tell also. And Jonathan, or Johnny, when he's a kid, I was a 13-year-old kid in, let's say, 1970, which that's who I was. I was a 13-year-old boy, hooligan myself in 1970. So it's very easy from the middle part is narrated first person point of view through Johnny as a 13-year-old. And a lot of my friends have said, is that you? That's you, right? That's, and, you do write what you know, you write what you're familiar with. And so that era of being a kid in that era and knowing what kids do and the trouble they get into and that kind of thing was a lot of fun to tap into. But I think to answer hopefully to answer your question is that I never lost, and then other characters in the book, the depth of, who they are from the standpoint of their emotional depth or lack of depth. Hank's father, for example, is a very codependent person with Hank's mother. Hank becomes a very codependent person. He's not perfect. He was married at the time he went to the war. His homosexual relationship was discovered later. Obviously, it broke up their marriage. So there were a lot of things that were tragic, very difficult, embarrassing, humiliating. So there were a lot of emotions to work with, and that, I think, bringing the two of them together, where there was this empathy, because Johnny, when he meets Hank, and Johnny's running around with this gang who they just want to spy on this guy because he's deformed, he's badly burned, all these things. Johnny's heart goes out to him. Johnny wants to meet him. Johnny wants to protect him. And that's when the relationship starts. And then it grows from there. They don't talk for 30 years, but then when they come back together, the third part of the book is all about their reunion. And they spend 2 weeks together. Hank now lives in San Francisco. And this now is in around the year 2000. So it has that kind of emotional draw, that emotional connection, and then reconnect. I think that I tried hard to emulate and project, and I think I did it based on the reviews and the feedback I've gotten. So
do you feel that you have ever had like that strong intergenerational connection with somebody, whether as Hank or as Jonathan, the younger or the older?
it's not based on anything I went through or have gone through. I haven't had that relationship with an older person. I wish I could have or would have. I regret that I didn't know my grandparents better, that kind of thing. But I think that I've seen it happen, and I've seen the impact that people can have on each other regardless of age. I try to have that impact on younger kids and my own kids, which I have less impact on my own kids than I do, friends of theirs.
Be surprised.
Think I'm a wonderful guy, and they think I'm an idiot, of course, right? But I think that that human connection can happen no matter age difference, no matter generational difference. And human connection, if it's deep and spiritual and soulful, can transcend generations. And that, again, is one of the things I wanted to, once I got into the story, that's what I wanted to do.
I know myself, I've actually had several older people I had a very strong connection, especially my aunt. The one that actually has encouraged me, I would say the two people who have encouraged me when my writing the most was my mom and my aunt. My aunt passed away 15 years ago now. But I remember having so many conversations where she's like, you should do it. And she goes, just make sure to save every single one of your rejection letters. So that way you can look back at them and see where you've gone. But I also feel like I've also had the opportunity of being the older person too, because I've done foster care. Well, I adopted my oldest through the foster care system, but the rest of them all went back to their parents. And I feel like I've had an opportunity to have that relationship with a couple of them that have gone back. But anyway, so like that intergenerational connection, I think is just so incredibly powerful, because there's so much you can learn from somebody that's not your age, whether it's younger or older. But anyway, because of World War II is a very popular genre to write in through historical fiction. But one of the things that a lot of people have to do is research. What kind of research did you do for this particular novel?
I was very fortunate because once I developed the homosexual theme with Hank and his lover in World War II, there's a lot of resources out there about that soldiers have written about their own experiences. There's one book called Coming Out Under Fire, which was all about the gay soldier in World War II and the discrimination they faced and just the turmoil that they went through. And I wanted to make sure that in the book, there's nothing that happened in the book that's overly sensationalized. So everything in the book actually has happened to people. Those kind of relationships, the things that happened during the war, during combat, during when soldiers are bunking together, that kind of thing. So I did a lot of research on that. I've always been fascinated by World War II. So that generation, it's my parents' generation. My father served in the Navy. My mom worked in the Red Cross. Her brother was badly wounded in World War II, my uncle. So I grew up hearing stories about both the Depression and World War II and the things they went through, and things we can't even comprehend. And I think that's one thing that drew me to that generation and that era. But I did, I read a lot. The internet is a marvelous tool. I don't know how authors used to write without Google, but I wanted to make sure it was, and I've gotten a lot of, and I will say that the gay theme didn't come until I was well into developing the characters. Okay, that wasn't the motive to write about. I've gotten so many notes and emails from gay soldiers. One was from his uncle, who was a gay soldier in World War II and came out after the war. One was from Vietnam vet. I've gotten probably a half dozen notes from individuals who have said that this book really resonated with them and it was true to form and they appreciate it and it meant a lot to them. That means everything to me. And so when you ask what kind of research, I wanted to make sure it was as fact-based and real as possible. And I didn't want it to be formulaic or over sensationalized or dramatic for the sake of drama or anything like that. So I think that and looking forward in terms of continuing to write, that is a benchmark that I'm always going to try to aspire to and make sure I really hit the mark on, whether it's, and my next book I'm writing about is also historical fiction. It's also in the same era. So there's a lot of things that I can pull from this. In fact, the next book is about his sister. So it's not necessarily a sequel or a series. It could be part of a series, I suppose, and we'll see where it goes. But and I didn't have the intent of writing that. It was like after I finished this, I said, okay, what's my next book going to be? And I thought, well, there's this fascinating character, Hank's sister. Her name's Eliza, and she really is a fascinating person. Very strong-willed, stubborn, nonconformist. There's a lot to work with there. So I'm writing that story. I'm writing her story. So I'm writing now first-person point of view through a 19-year-old woman in 1939. So how's that?
Are you going to go back to your other book that you shelved a while ago? Do you think you will?
I may. It would take a total rewrite, which could happen. I think there's a story there. I just don't. It's not well told. I didn't know anything about the beginning hook, the middle build, the payoff ending, the inciting incident, the transformation of a character. I didn't know anything about any of that at the time I wrote it. So it's just a bunch of stuff, it's just this dribble, and there's no story arc, there's no progressive complication, there's a crisis, there's no resolution. There aren't these hooks or these themes, these beats that you have to have in a novel that I've now learned just from studying other writers and so forth.
So I have a question about your actual book. Were you self-published, hybrid published, or traditional?
It was independent. That was the other thing is once I wrote the book, then it's what am I going to do with it?
Okay,
And
so that is actually why I want to, because I thought it was self-published, but then I saw that it was, you had published it through a publishing company, which I'm assuming is yours, Grandview
mine,
Press.
yes,
But so I get a lot of independent books, and you can often spot the difference between a self-published and not, and I could not with yours, because the cover is absolutely beautiful. The formatting is exactly how you would expect a traditional publishing.
mm-hmm.
And so I had to take a look to see who did your cover and your formatting. And it looks like Victoria Wolfe with Wolfe Design and Marketing.
Yes.
How
Yes.
did you find her?
The act of figuring out how to get this book, make it real. I once you start looking at publishing consultants, I guess for lack of a better term, I was inundated by them, right? And all of them were, they're all legit, but they're all different. And it's like there's so much to learn. I ended up meeting a woman named Polly Latovsky, who owns a company called My Word Publishing, and she's one of many that do this, right? And I saw her website and watched a video, and I just fell in love with her, and we had a chat, and she said the difference between me and the others is that I want you to have all the rights, all the control. So you're going to start your own publishing company, which I did, Grandview Press. You will own all the rights. You can do whatever you want with this thing. And then I'll help you with, getting in paperback and, KDB publishing and Kindle and all of that. And I'll hook you up with designers and editors. I've got my suitcase full of these people. So she recommended Victoria. I also worked with a couple different editors and developmental editing and copy editing and proofing and all of those things. And those were all, she brought those people to me and helped tremendously with, it's all self-marketed, of course. I don't have any big publishing house behind me. So I'm learning as I go, and things like Amazon ads and Facebook ads. And I did what's called a Power Boost campaign where I bought a number of lists a couple weekends ago, and I made it to #1 in, I think, 5 genres. I was #1 for a few days. Well, actually, for a whole week, I was #1 in World War II historical fiction, #1 in historical fiction, #1 in LGBTQ historical fiction. And I rose to, I think, this is just Kindle Unlimited. So that was pretty cool. And so I learned all of this through Polly and through her group, My Word Publishing. So that's how I ended up. And yeah, Victoria was awesome cover design. She had like 5 or 6 different options the first pass. And I just fell in love right away with this, because this is Hank Cummings as a young boy sitting on a fence in his farm in Grayson, Kentucky. And when you read the book, you'll see how it comes full circle back to the epilogue. The prologue starts with the end of his life, and the epilogue starts with the beginning of his life as a young boy. And I thought that cover really hit the mark.
So I actually had the opportunity to talk with Polly as well. She's been on here, and she might be who connected me with you. I'm not 100%.
She is who connected us. Yes.
Okay,
that's right.
All right.
Yes.
She's connected me with a few different people. So anyway, but she was great to talk to. I do want to ask one more question, and I want to thank you so much for being on here. But I want to ask you one more question before we go. And what is one thing that you have learned through the writing process this past year as you've published your book?
The act of working to overcome resistance. And I give all the credit there. Not that I have overcome resistance, but it goes back to that difference of being a dabbler versus a professional. And Stephen Pressfield, who I would highly recommend anybody, again, wrote the book, The War of Art. He's published, he wrote The Legend of Bagger Vance, but now he's written so many books on the art of writing. and the art of creativity for artists. And he has been my biggest inspiration in terms of, I get a weekly blog post from him. I have a number of his books, and it's just keep at it. Don't give up. Keep writing. Don't worry if you have to throw 10,000 words away. The book I'm writing now, I threw 50,000 words away because I was writing this whole life story of Eliza, and I realized I have no story here. I'm just writing her biography. So now I'm just writing about a summer. So I threw away. You just got to be willing to do that and not get discouraged and keep at it. And it's the hardest thing, overcoming that resistance.
I feel like that those pages that you throw away, because like I had to throw away my entire first chapter just because I realized I did a bunch of info dumping. And so like my first chapter out. And I feel like that's actually important stuff because that builds the world. So like it's more like brainstorming. And I think when you scratch it, you have to think of it that way. Is like that was important, but you don't need to have it in the story. It was important for you to know your character. That's how I think of it.
Yeah, there was nothing I threw. When I say throw away, it's just those words aren't going to make it on paper. They're all valuable in terms of me learning more about the character. And now I know Eliza so well, I'm almost like living as Eliza Cummings, this 19-year-old woman in 1939. It's really kind of crazy. I'm seeing the world through her eyes. So.
I did mean to ask one question. I do have to go here soon, but I do want to ask this before I go is there a World War II book that, aside from your own, that you would recommend for someone to read, specifically me?
Oh, you asked me too quickly. Oh my gosh. One of my favorite authors is Erik Larson. He's written, I don't know if you call it historical fiction, it's more nonfiction, but one book he wrote was, I think, in the Garden of the Beasts.
Okay.
Right. I think it's about the ambassador, the American ambassador to Germany in the mid to late 30s, when Hitler was doing what Hitler was doing then, and how he was trying to alert folks back here, the administration back here, what was happening. That's a good World War II historical fiction book, if you haven't read it.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
He also wrote a tremendous book about the beginning of World War I. And I forget the name of it. Anyway, you're asking me too quickly, but yeah, there's so much. There's so much good stuff out there.
Yes, I agree. Like the one that really impacted me most recently was it's an older book now, but it was The Boy in the Striped Blue Pajamas. Just because I wasn't actually expecting to know what I was going to read. I just kind of picked it up because I had heard about it before. I didn't really know anything about it. But anyway, I just want to thank you so much, Pete, for being on, just taking the time out of your schedule to be on my show. I truly do appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And I also just want to thank my listeners. If you have been listening for a while, please rate my podcast. This allows not only my podcast to get before more listeners, but also my author's books to get before more readers. So if you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy my conversation with historical fiction writer Susan Ferber, who is the author of The Essence of an Hour. Again, I had the privilege of talking with Pete McGinty. He wrote the book Private Cummings, and you can also find more about him on PeteMcGinty.com. Thank you so much for being on here, Pete.
Thank you, Agnes.
Thank you for joining us in Author's Alcove, the Writing Corner. We hope today's discussion has inspired and informed your writing journey. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review to help us reach more writers like you. And remember, we are brought to you today by the letter S, as in Scrivener, your partner in crafting and organizing your story. Again, if you would like to support me through Patreon, that is always appreciated. You can find both of these links in our show notes. You can also listen to us at Author's Alcove, the healing place, where authors share about their books on healing and recovery, or Author's Alcove, the Reading Nook, where we talk about fantasy, sci-fi, and the occasional horror. Until next time, keep writing, keep creating, and we'll see you back in the writing.